of everyone's time. So I'm so thrilled to have both of you here with me today. So I'm going to give a quick kind of intro to the conversation. And then for all of you joining us, we are very open to your questions, to your comments, to your conversations. So would love to just first see people enter into the chat, just anything about where you're coming from, or if you do have a burning question already that you want to make sure that we cover, to make sure that you add that into the chat or into the Q&A section now, and we'll make sure to get through that. So again, I'm Mary Beth Ferrante. I'm the founder of Work 360. And I am joined by Jessica Chang and Jill Koziol. Did I say that right, Jill?
You did. Well done.
Okay, got it. There's a little delay there. So we are going to just have a conversation and open discussion around the Childcare Cliff. So a few things to just ground us in that. First of all, we are expecting about 70,000 childcare programs to actually have to close because of the lack of funding that we will no longer have at the end of the American Rescue Plan. So this is expiring at the end of the month. And is really going to harm about 3 million children who could lose their childcare spots. And even for those of us that might be not directly impacted, it's going to cause longer wait lists. It's going to increase costs. It's going to be a struggle for us as, colleagues, employers, employees, to be able to, navigate childcare, and even things like after school programs and summer camps could be impacted as well. So we're looking at a large loss to our economy. And as many of us, I'm sure everyone here knows, we really believe that childcare is infrastructure. Just like we need the road to get to work or the Zoom meeting to actually work for us to be able to be together, we need childcare to be productive. And this is really impacting our overall workforce and could cause about $9 billion in lost earnings for families across the United States. So it's a really huge and important conversation for us to be having. So to get started, I'm going to just kind of introduce our panelists and myself, and then we'll dive in. So as I said, I'm Mary Beth Ferrante. I'm the founder of Work 360. We're a coaching, training, and on-demand resource platform for working parents. I'm a mom of two. I'm really focused on the intersection of work and family, and published for Forbes and other national publications, and also work with the Fair Play Policy Institute on how we can have more equity in our homes as well. Jessica Chang here. So excited to have you here. She is an entrepreneur, the co-founder and CEO of Upwards, which was formerly We Care. It's a technology-driven care solutions company with a mission to make care accessible to all families and empower the caregivers who provide it, which I love just the work that you're doing, both to support the caregivers themselves, as well as all of our families that use it. And obviously, this is going to be such a huge and critical conversation to your community. Let's see, what else do I want to say about you? Jessica is the VP of Marketplace at RadPad, COO of Affinity China, a principal investor at Macquarie Capital, and a graduate at UC Berkeley. So really excited to have you here. And then Jill Koziol is the co-founder and CEO of Motherly, a modern lifestyle brand redefining motherhood, engaging 40 million plus users monthly, which is incredible. And if you haven't been on her website, there's all the best things that you need to know. So make sure to check that out. She's also the co-author of This is Motherhood, a motherly collection of reflections and practices, and the forthcoming book, The Motherly Guide to Becoming Mama, redefining the pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. The one thing that I also want to shout out is the most incredible thing that I see from Motherly is every single year, they do the state of womanhood, the state of motherhood, and the state of motherhood. And this is an annual report that really does a deep dive into what is impacting families and mothers, especially across the U.S. They take a cross-section of so many different people and their backgrounds and families and how at different places across the country. And it really is just an incredible opportunity for us to get a pulse on just what's happening with mothers in America. So I'm super excited to have you both here today. And we're going to dive in with my first question here, which is Jessica. So as Upwards really envisions a world where families are free of anxiety of securing and affording quality care, and where caregivers are actually empowered to serve their communities without compromising their own well-being, this is the opposite of that. Right? We're losing funding, we're losing access. It's causing more anxiety for those of us that need care, and it is clearly going to impact the well-being of the communities that are offering and providing care. You know, we know so many families already live in childcare deserts. Quality care is just unaffordable. Doesn't matter where you are across the country, it's really challenging. So as the CEO of Upwards and someone who really interacts closely with both sides of the communities, but particularly those running childcare centers, what do you see as kind of those biggest challenges right now, the things that they're feeling really, they're really struggling with it as they're facing this cliff coming up at the end of the month?
Yeah, so it's a it's a very loaded question. The truth is, the American Rescue Plan, the funding was designed to tackle a lot of challenges of the pandemic, but it actually ended up addressing long-standing issues in the childcare industry. From ARPA, childcare providers were able to hire assistants, offer health benefits, do renovations, and use those payments just to stay afloat. And I want to give you a few real life examples because I like connecting real people, real situations to what has occurred versus giving you like a general synopsis of it. So we had one provider, Mariama Salam of Happy Kids We Care. She used pandemic funding to help her keep tuition costs affordable for families, and she provided meals also for the children in her care. We have a provider like Yolanda Crinanes, who's part of La Casita de Manacas daycare, and I know I'm going to badger every single one of these things. So, was really able to utilize her government payments for daycare renovations. Now, to kind of answer the questions, I'm like, well, how did Upwards help navigate the loss of this funding? Let me tell you a story about Sandra. So Sandra Segura from Bakersfield, California, has been part of our network for over 2 years now. And during the pandemic, she was able to leverage about $12,000 federal funding to hire 2 new assistants, and enabled her to expand the number of available childcare spots in her daycare, which is amazing, right? She's doing exactly what we wanted, which is how do we have more spots? How do we really utilize that funding to help families? Well, before we know the cliff is coming up, but before so, Sandra really started to think about what else can I be doing. So we actually, part of 2021, ended up launching a California subsidy program that actually launched in 2022 for our childcare providers. Now we are supporting Sandra to keep those slots filled and sustain her business by actually connecting her with families in our subsidy program. So while she's losing the funding, she's still helping low-income families, and Upwards is helping to make sure that occurs by leveraging low-income subsidy programs that already exist that are funded by the state. Now, being part of that subsidy program, Sandra is reimbursed when care is provided. It's a far cry from the months-long process it used to be, and this allows her to plan ahead, pay her assistants, and continue supporting the children of local farmers who work tirelessly to feed our communities. So that is one of the programs that we have that really kind of says like, okay, well, we know this is happening. How do we support our providers while at the same time support the families that need it the most? Sandra's experience really serve as a model for hundreds of thousands of other providers in the country.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think what's incredible is being able to be that connection to key resources and to that kind of state programs or other funding, but also recognizing like that is one of the biggest challenges too, is that we're having to, again, piece things together as opposed to having this kind of federal national support that enables providers to do exactly like what you said, is provide spots for low-income families. And we also know that those are the families that are going to be impacted the most, because those are the families that are going to, struggle to find quality care. Those are the communities where the loss of funding is going to hurt more dramatically. And where families may not be able to afford an increase in cost or an increase in tuition if that's the approach that the provider needs to take. Yeah. So Jill, I know, you engage 40 million mothers monthly. What are you hearing from your readers, from your community? What are they worried about?
So you mentioned the State of Motherhood survey before, and what we know from that, which is the largest statistically significant study of mothers each year. I'm so happy that you enjoy it. We make all of the data open source because we think it's so important that mothers and their allies and governmental officials and companies can use that data to make better decisions to support mothers. So we knew in this that it's incredibly challenging already to find, as you mentioned, affordable, accessible, and high quality childcare. Those are the three things that every single mother wants to have. And it's like finding the Holy Grail. It's practically impossible already as it currently is. And so what parents are concerned about are some of the things that you mentioned. They're concerned that their childcare facility will close. They believe, that's going to make it harder to find accessible childcare for them. And it's also, as that supply decreases, as you mentioned, the costs will go up, right? We live in a capitalist society, like supply and demand here. And so costs will go up at a time when parents are already spending, in many places, the entire cost of a mortgage on their childcare each month. And so this is happening, unfortunately, the cost increasing is happening at the same time also that the pandemic level child tax credit is also expiring. And so it's the double whammy that is hurting families in a lower socioeconomic level the most, unfortunately also. And then for those that maybe still can find a way to make this work in some way, they're concerned about the upheaval that their children will experience. Children are already, starting new school years and all these different experiences, and to layer in now additional, in some cases, trauma, right? To actually make a change to a new childcare provider, increase anxiety and such. Very, very concerning for a lot of parents to, first off, leave someone that's maybe hopefully been like a loving, wonderful environment to have to find a new one and move this. And that leads, unfortunately, to parents having to make a very tough decision to stop working. And this all has so many, secondary and tertiary impacts on our economy, right? And on local communities as well. And as we've mentioned, in local communities that are disproportionately people of color as well. And so there's a lot of concerns, and it's one of these things that it's like you see the train wreck coming, that it's happening, and there's just a lot of fear and anxiety before it actually happens.
Absolutely. And I think there's the concern of what can we actually do, right? And so for those families that are having to make changes to their child's care, would love both of you to comment, I think, on how can we help our families through those key transitions, or make sure that they are feeling supported through this kind of uncertainty. What are your top tips?
So I can share quickly on the family side, perhaps, and Jessica, maybe you on how did the providers themselves navigate this. We've actually put out content. Of course, we're trying to meet mom where they are on this and provide some tips. First and foremost, get as much information as you can empathetically from your daycare provider about their plans and what their projections are. Some of them, I hope now we've been, yelling and screaming about this enough that everyone knows it's happening, but have a conversation with them and find out. And if this is happening, and it probably won't be that childcare providers close the last day of the month, there might be some lingering time on it, but you should start looking for new centers immediately. And then you should also speak openly to your kids about a possible transition. Make sure that you're watching your own words and your vibes that you're giving out related to this with your kids. Regardless of their age, they feed off of our energy around this. And so trying to project some confidence in this and that you've got this and you're going to figure it out together. And if you are lucky enough to find a new childcare provider that you can afford and that you feel good about and that's really accessible to you, jump into that new community and make sure that you're creating a new community for your family and for your children specifically. And if they are making that change, be really consistent with the rest of their days, because it's going to be a big one. And then lastly, is just look at the financial implications for your family. If you have a partner, have real conversations about this. Like, what are the implications? Is there a different approach that we need to take to childcare or to work right now? For some, it may be looking for a more flexible employer in the future. There's lots of different things that may happen over the long term, but in the very immediate, talk to your childcare provider to see if you're going to be impacted and start looking around immediately, if so.
I love that. Those are fantastic tips. And I think really tangible things that we can all take away, and often in any transition as well. So very helpful. But Jessica, kind of bringing it back to you in the provider side, I think Jill makes a good point that this might not mean that your care provider closes on September 30th, but like, what are the kind of key transitions that they're looking at to sustain or to understand if they are going to have to reduce the number of spots?
Yeah, so we've actually been talking to a lot of our providers and really trying to help hone them into other government programs that are actually on a recurrent basis. Actually, a lot of people don't know, but the government actually spends close to $80 billion on childcare every year. That's not going to go away. That is actually still there. And many of the programs are addressed for families and also childcare providers. So we've been really pushing them to look at those resources, look at what else is available that they can get, whether that is programs to make them more tech enabled so they can be more efficient, save some dollars there, or programs that really offer them funding that is on a recurring basis versus something that might end in a couple of months or a couple of years. And those are the bigger resources that we're really pushing to them and saying like, hey, there are other options. But if those options don't work, we're looking at contingency plans, right? Saying, well, okay, if those don't, could you start your own home daycare? If you worked at a center and the center is actually reducing the number of employees or they're closing, could we help you start your own home daycare? If not, if that's not an option for you, maybe you don't have a home that is readily available to do so. Could we help you become a nanny or babysitter for families that can use that temporary support or those that can actually afford it? I think the bigger question is more not just on families and childcare providers, to be honest, because a lot of times that's where the brunt of the childcare issue actually stems onto. Families having to figure it out, childcare providers having to figure out how are they going to get paid to stay in the industry. But we should really ask the payers that can support this industry, which are government and employers, right? Have we actually said like, okay, can we talk to our current employers and say, well, this is happening and I need more PTO. And what are programs that you have? Because you'll be surprised. We've actually seen a lot of employers come to us and say, hey, you know what? Our family network within our company, within our union has said that childcare is a serious issue. And if we don't, we're going to lose half of our workforce. So what can we do? So by bonding actually with employees in wherever you work and pushing your employer, you'd be surprised at what employers can actually do. We have some employers that are actually subsidizing 100% of the childcare cost for their employees because they know that's more important. And it's going to be way costly than having to, actually replace an employee that leaves because they can't figure out their childcare issues.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's an incredible opportunity for all of us to recognize that we can have a voice in this. And we absolutely can connect with our colleagues and our friends and start to really name the challenges that we're facing. What, Jessica, kind of going off of that, like, what have you seen as really the model or maybe the best practice for companies that are finally seeing the light and recognizing that this is an issue? How have they understood, I guess I would say, like really at the top level, that this is something that needs to be addressed from an employer perspective?
Sometimes it's hard to kind of connect those pieces together because the people that really need it most are frontline workers. Yep. And generally the people that are deciding who gets childcare in their company is management, right? Who probably have kids that are way older or don't have an issue with paying for the cost of childcare. So a lot of times what we structure it is based on data, right? Well, how many people are you losing every single year? And what is that cost actually adding up to you? because you'll be surprised that if, for example, you offer a childcare stipend, you can actually increase retention by 20%. And that retention cost is way cheaper than what you would have paid for a childcare stipend.
Yep.
Not to mention, you get a tax credit from it too, as an employer. So we really phrase it in a way that management can understand. Oh, okay, this can save on my bottom line, and it can increase retention, and it can have me tax savings. Well, really what we're trying to say to them is you need to have childcare, and this is a benefit for your employees, but let's put it in a different framework that everyone understands on that level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that is going to continue to be a challenge. So I would just encourage everyone that's listening here to recognize that these are not ever one and done conversations, right? Like presenting the data, connecting with other colleagues, finding that key executive that maybe is really going to be a champion for this in the room with the other C-suite management team. That all takes time, stamina, a lot of continued conversations and continued pushing. But I think that's what's so incredible about, having those communities within your workplace to be able to connect with. So even if you don't have a union, I know you mentioned a union as an example, there is an opportunity to still connect with your colleagues and really push, I think, those agendas forward.
And Mary Beth, actually on that, just to empower any working mothers listening to this right now with a little bit of data, 47% of working mothers, according to our 2022 survey, are the primary breadwinners in their families. Okay, so you are not alone if you are the primary breadwinner, and you should feel a power in that when you go and advocate for this. The second is that for the first time in history, millennial mothers are more educated, or millennial women generally are more educated than men. And so that means that when you go into the workplace, come in with the confidence that you are part of the most educated cohort in our economy right now, and that our economy and employers need you in the workplace. And so telling them and coming with that power of saying, like, we are not a minority, we are not niche, this is not a nice to have us in the workforce. This is actually a business imperative. You will not be competitive at an economic level, at the corporate level, or at the national level if we do not find a way to solve this for working mothers specifically, not just working fathers, not parents as a whole. This is, because of the society that we currently live in, this is primarily a working mother challenge. And it's time for employers and the government to recognize, again, the economic cost of that when we are coming forward as, again, super educated and breadwinners.
Absolutely. I'm like, can we get snaps and like a standing ovation to that one? I think that that's such an important piece of this, and recognizing that power and being able to really bring that. Yes, love that. Business, 47% primary, and most educated millennials are women. Yes, absolutely. And I think this is the piece of it that we really want to recognize too, is that care is infrastructure, and starting to continue to say that out loud, to say you need quality care to be a productive part of the workforce, to be there for your employer, is so instrumental in this. And so as employers, both of you employ your own teams. What are the things that you are addressing with your teams as maybe they're facing just care insecurity in general? Maybe they're not impacted directly by the cliff, but we all know that finding and piecing together care is always a challenge. So Jill, I'll let you start, and then Jessica, I'd love for you to chime in on this as well.
Sure. So we actually have a monthly all hands that's actually right after this today. And so it's a conversation we'll be having as a team, as a whole, employing, not surprisingly at Motherly, a lot of working mothers, to tell them these same tips, right, that I shared, and say, like, make sure you're asking your childcare provider. This is very important for our business also, that childcare continues to exist for each of our employees. And so prompting them to have these conversations and to let us know if they're facing something. In some ways, this harkens back a bit to the early days of the pandemic for us, and the conversations that we have with our employees. What happened then, when we've always been a 100% remote workforce with flexible hours too. And so that helps. But what we didn't have until the pandemic was children home while our employees were working from home. And, in many cases, a partner also home. And what the conversation that we had to have with our employees, and I think we have to have again in this particular instance, is that we can't do the false math in our families to detract only the childcare cost from the mother's salary to determine whether or not it is worth them continuing working. It needs to be like, that is just not the correct equation to be had. And so we will be encouraging them to have conversations with their partners if they are impacted in this in some way, to look at the household income and to apply the cost of childcare there and to figure out how to make it work as a partner instead of that burden falling on who is often the default parent, because again, their job matters. They're, earning income for their families. And so that's one of the things that we'll be doing, is trying to facilitate that conversation with them, because we really believe, to your point, there's no silver bullet in any of this. And the change has to happen at a cultural level, which is often in your home, right? And trying to change that at the corporate level, at the actual employer level, and then ultimately at the governmental level. And so we'll be working with them around flexibility and trying to identify and get ahead of any challenges that impacting their work, but also encouraging them to have maybe a different conversation, perhaps a more uncomfortable conversation at home.
Absolutely. Great tips. Jessica.
Well, during the pandemic, we actually went full remote and ended up finding that most of our employees are now outside of where we were based, which was LA. And now as part of like looking at our employee base, we're actually primarily women and primarily minorities as well. So this becomes a real issue for us. So one of the things we do as part of it is we ask our employees, what are you guys needing? Monthly surveys, continuous asking, what are you guys needing? What is the biggest challenge? We actually had an employee that came to me personally, was like, I lost my childcare. She is closing. I don't know what to do. My husband wants me to stay at home because he makes more money and I love my job. And we had to have a conversation like that. And I was like, well, actually, that's really not fair. You love your job. You should be able to stay at your job. But as a childcare company, we have that resources. We actually offer stipends to our employees that pay for the cost of childcare. And then at the same time, we actually find childcare for our employees too. That's our core, bread and butter. So anytime an employee needs childcare, we put our best heads in there and we're like, let's go find you the childcare you need, even if it's that emergency care. We found an amazing provider for that employee within a day. And she was able to put her kids through it. And then we had a hard conversation with her husband. But point being is, we are a community and we treat our employees just like we treat the clients, the families, the providers that we service. This is matters. And if we don't put that same kind of energy with our own employees, then we're not talking the same thing and we're not seeing the same thing. So.
Well, and I think what you both really bring up here is that we do have agency, and it can feel in these scenarios when there's something looming that's feels bigger than us, that there's not much we can do. But what you both pointed out is how important it is to have those really difficult and critical conversations early and often, whether that's with our partners to make them recognize that our jobs matter, that it's part of our identities, it's part of what makes us who we are and empowers us, but also that it is much bigger than just one salary or one person that you need to be looking at. It's not only your salary, but also your 401k, maybe that match, continued retirement savings, all those things. So we want to make sure that we're looking at that full income status of the household and not just one person. But then also, I think, Jessica, you mentioned too that your employee came to you, and that can feel really difficult to go to a manager with childcare issues, especially if that person is not a parent or a caregiver, or maybe, doesn't feel like personal things are meant at work. But those are the conversations that we have to be having. So find that person in your team or amongst your colleagues that can really support you. Find that person or that executive or level manager that can help you have that conversation so that you can start to really change the culture within your own family and within your own circle, because that's also going to be just as important as all the advocacy and all the work that we're doing at the government level and at the employer level as well. Jill, it looks like you have
because you just kind of led into it, but I feel like I'd be remiss to not also say this is not over yet. There is still an opportunity for Congress to act. And I think, again, empowering women and our allies, mothers and our allies, to know that we are, frankly, the largest voting bloc that's out there. And so if we, and this is from our State of Motherhood survey, we were able to find that finding affordable, accessible childcare and also paid family leave are two things that women and mothers are willing to cross party lines for in order to get there. They will vote for a candidate for that specifically. And so I think it's really important for us to understand, again, our power in this, and call up your congressman, call up your congressperson, I should say, call up your senator and say, like, this is not acceptable, and I'm going to vote you out in the next election. If I'm watching your voting record on this, I'm watching the action that you take, and do not question whether or not the last election should show us if mothers stepping up and voting can make a difference. It absolutely can. And so I think, again, not feeling like hope is fully lost. It is challenging, but there have been crazier things that have happened. And so I think if we were to truly come together and pick up the phone and send the emails and send the texts and show up at their offices for those that are local and say, like, this cannot happen, you must actually take action right now. Because for all of our talk of being family friendly and, you know, prioritizing the family in this country, we're not actually backing it up with action. And it's time for women, mothers, the foundation of society, to use our voice and demand it.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. And I just dropped into the chat a link, and I'll be posting this on LinkedIn as well. This is from Moms Rising. They're an amazing organization that really helps us connect directly with our Congress people, to be able to make sure that we have those scripts, that we're able to make those phone calls, that we're calling the right offices, and that we're really able to use our voice in our agency to demand what it is that we need for our lives and to be able to support us. So click on that link. It'll help you connect with your congressperson. You can have that conversation. You can ask for that change. We know there's a few bills that are actually out on the floor around this. And to Jill's point, the fight is not over. And even if we pass September 30th, the fight will continue for months and years ahead as we, you know, all advocate for what we actually need. So, okay, other than asking our childcare provider directly, is there any way we can see how centers are going to be affected by this funding? So Jessica, I'm going to turn that one to you. Do you have any insight as to whether or not we can find this information?
Unfortunately, a lot of that information becomes pretty hard to find because it's really based on your own centers or home daycare provider. I would actually have a very honest conversation with them, especially if your child's there, or let's say you're waitlisted and your child's about to attend, give them a call. I think what you'll find is most people that start childcare centers or home daycares, they're in it for care, and they'll be very honest with you about it. We've seen a lot of centers and home daycares do fundraising because parents called, asked the question, and the community came in to help fundraise to make sure that home daycare, that childcare center stays open. So ask them. Sometimes they don't want to talk about it, but ask them, have that honest conversation with them.
I love that. Okay, so we're kind of starting to wrap up on our conversation. If there's other questions, please drop them in the chat or just even raise your hand. You can come off mute. But is there any other points that we didn't have a chance to cover today that you think are really important to this conversation?
I'm going to probably say something real art because we actually work with the government a lot of times. And, you know, I think there's a really important message to be saying here that a lot of these programs that are being put out, there is a success component to it. And if we can have them be successful, that really leads the charge because data really kind of points to saying like, hey, if the data's here, like you have to listen. I do know, you know, we had an opportunity this summer to actually meet with the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary Raimondo, at a Mom's First event in DC. And specifically, one of the biggest components she's pushing out is the CHIPS Act. And the CHIPS Act, what it's meant to say, it's like, hey, if you want things to be made in America for semiconductors, guess what? This is an economic issue that childcare is taking care of. It's not a social issue because you want more people to work in our factories. Guess what? It's going to have to be moms. And the only way moms can come back to the workforce is if they have childcare. So what she's essentially done is gone to DC with a lot of men and said, hey, by the way, you want semiconductors to be made in America? Guess what? I want childcare, and this is the reason why, because we're not going to find employees just suddenly come out, a workforce suddenly come out of nowhere.
Absolutely.
So,
And we have examples of this having happened in the past too, I think is really example. Like when we prioritize this, to your point, people can look this up on their own, but like the semiconductor challenge is a very real national security challenge for us. And so bringing that back into the US is critical to our future. And to your point, we need employees that are trained and able to go and then work in those factories. And so if you go back and look during wartime, during World War II, as an example, when we had a national security threat and we were sending our men, the people that were working more in that time, overseas to do something. And we identified that we need women to work in factories. So, a pretty good close comp here. We had federally funded childcare providers and centers that were funded where a woman could come, drop her children off. That childcare provider would take them to the doctor if they needed to be. And when the mom picked them up, would deliver a casserole to them so they had dinner.
Yes. I'm like, can I also have food delivered to me every day? That's amazing.
Yes. And so when we prioritize and we understand the economic and the national security implications of needing to have women in work and mothers in work, then there's a model for this. We know how to do it, to your point. And so connecting those dots and saying like, this is not crazy. We know how to do this when there's an issue like this. And so again, you maybe remind your congressperson about this.
Yeah. And point to it. Point to the things that are already there. Showcase what's already being done because it is available. There are things that most of Congress care about, like semiconductors and national defense, which we should, and security, but point to it. Point to the things that are working and say, if this can work, we know you can do more. And here's how I'm going to phrase it and frame it for you guys.
Absolutely. And Birgit also asked, I think this goes off of this conversation. We're talking about government, but also with larger employees and employers and companies, we find that most employers are pretty quiet on this issue. So what are the things that you have either seen done or that you would challenge us all to do to really raise awareness for our employers?
We have a ton of stats on that. So if anyone is needing that, we can send it to you to send to your employer, first of all. But we've seen, we work directly with employers. We just launched recently our Amazon partnership. And specifically, the childcare benefit program was actually meant for frontline workers, essentially the delivery service people, the people that are literally delivering your boxes to your home. Mm-hmm. And Amazon, as big as a company is identified and said, well, we're looking at this completely wrong. Those that are actually delivering our boxes is how we make money. We should be creating a benefit for them. And they did that. Same thing with Chobani. Chobani even went further and said, hey, we're going to offer a childcare stipend. And we're going to give a stipend regardless of where you're working, regardless of what you're making. Everyone gets the same stipend. Well, actually, technically, a slightly different, but everyone gets a stipend. And that's important. Even the US Army has a childcare benefit program. So even if the Army can do it, so can employers. And there are multiple examples from manufacturing to healthcare to retail to hospitality, doesn't matter. There are examples being set. We just point to them and say, well, look at it this way. If these employers can do it and we're in the same industry, why can't you do it? But also know, one more thing I was going to ask, employers are very competitive for jobs too. Meaning, if you know that a competitive employer that might be in the same area as you, right? That like their employers are hunting for those same people, or you have a industry and you know that you have a competitive employer that might be somewhere else, but you guys do the same thing, use that example because you'll be surprised. Employers take that into more serious consideration. Like, well, we need to stand up against that same employer or that same company that's in the same location because we want to be competitive in hiring.
Love that.
I
heard in your interview too.
Yeah, completely agree with that. I think it's also important to recognize that large corporations right now have more profits than ever before in many cases. And so again, pushing on that, I think the change has to start with these larger corporations that then are trying to compete for top talent and have the financial capabilities to do that. Not everyone, in fact, most people don't work for a very large corporation. And so I think that is more challenging as you kind of go down into smaller companies. And the last few years have been very challenging economically for a lot of companies. We've seen a lot of layoffs, a lot of companies go out of business and the such. And so there's still this shift occurring and happening. But as we start to see larger companies do it and bring that down and start that competition, I do have confidence that it will start to flow through. The other thing to note is it is so hard. We are asking working mothers to nurture in a society that does not nurture them back without the structural support. We know that this is a hard ask. We must, it's our generation's requirement here to continue to push through in this and move into the boardroom and move into the halls of Congress so that we can actually make these changes more structural and to really flow through. And so not only can you be pushing on your employer to be more competitive in this with others in their sector, but also work and take that promotion, like fight for that promotion, move yourself up into that so that you can be a decision maker that's helping to advocate for others in the organization for these types of benefits.
Absolutely. I love that. And such a great note for us to kind of wrap up with, which is just really recognizing your own agency in this conversation, in this challenge, in this situation that we are faced as a nation, and recognizing that you can do something and it doesn't just have to happen to you. You have the opportunity to really make a change within your own family, your own community, your own employer, whether that's having that hard conversation or going to get that promotion or making sure that you have clicked on the link to call your congressperson. There's a step that you can take. So I would just encourage everyone to take at least one step today towards really improving the situation for all of us. So we are going to wrap up, but I'll just leave it with any last comments from Jill or Jessica before we break off.
Just thank you for bringing this conversation forward. We need to be having it and screaming it from the rooftops right now, honestly, and making sure that people understand that this critical component and infrastructure, to your point, is about to expire and have very real implications on families in our economy. So thank you for helping elevate the conversation. And thank you, Jessica, for all the work that you're doing within your business to help provide a buffer, in the absence of government support, to really provide that buffer. Like most things in life, it takes a village. So excited to have you guys in mind.
Absolutely.
Well, ditto to that. But also for those that are joining us today, thank you for coming and listening. And, in the end of the day, we are advocates for you. And we want you to have the stronger message and the stronger ability, and to know that there are other moms out there that are saying the exact same thing, and you're not alone in this. So continue to do what you guys are doing, and we will continue to advocate for you guys.
Love it. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday. And if you need any additional support or resources, you can come find us and connect with us, and we will make sure to get that information to all of you. Have a wonderful day. Thanks.